So in today's session, we're talking about the AWS Foundational Technical Review Lens, launched at re:Invent 2020. In AWS Well-Architected Tool, the AWS Foundational Technical Review, formerly known as the APN Technical Baseline Review, requires independent software vendors, or ISVs, to meet specific requirements based on the AWS Well-Architected Framework in order to unlock benefits in the AWS Partner Network. The FTR Lens provides ISVs a self-service mechanism to assess readiness prior to requesting an FTR. During this webinar today, we are going to learn how to use the FTR Lens in preparation for an FTR, common risks to identify and resolve prior to requesting an FTR, and how to request the FTR and unlock the APN benefits related to FTR. Now, I'd like to introduce your presenter today, Claudine Morales, Partner Solutions Architect.
Thanks, Lydia. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today, as Lydia has said, I'm going to do a demo of the new Foundational Technical Review Lens. It's now in the Well-Architected Tool, which is available to you at no additional charge in your AWS console. Before that, though, I'd like to quickly review some FTR fundamentals here in case there are attendees this morning who are not familiar with what the FTR is and why you should do it. Foundational Technical Review is really the new name for what used to be the Technical Baseline Review, or the TBR. So if you're familiar with the TBR, you should be familiar with the FTR. The FTR review process actually differs according to what type of workload you have, and I'm going to talk briefly about workload types as well later on. This demo is particularly for those of you who offer solutions that you host or manage in your AWS accounts, basically solutions that customers consume as a service. Otherwise, the FTR Lens doesn't really apply to you, but of course, feel free to stick around and learn about it. It never hurts. I'm also going to show you how to request an FTR, and then I'm going to be answering questions that were not addressed in the chat. Okay, so first, what's the FTR and why should you complete an FTR? At the core of it, the FTR assesses a product or offering with the goal of reducing risk. That's essentially what it is. It is based on the AWS Well-Architected Framework, particularly the security, reliability, and operational excellence pillars. The FTR really takes a subset of best practices from those three pillars, the ones that are deemed to be really fundamental for positive customer outcomes, and it requires very specific controls to be in place. I know that this causes confusion for many, but one of the key differences between the FTR and the Well-Architected Review is that while the Well-Architected Review is comprised of an expansive set of best practices and provides broad guidance on how you could better architect your workloads, the FTR is really prescriptive on what you should be doing. So for example, we want you to be doing certain things with your CloudTrail logs or S3 buckets that you own. It's a lot more specific. I'll give you links to some of the FTR checklists later on, and when I demo the FTR Lens, you'll also see how specific the FTR gets. So why should you do an FTR? So I've already touched on the first point here. It's a risk mitigation tool. When you go through an FTR, you get to measure how much risk is associated with your solution or workload based on FTR requirements. It also provides you with an opportunity to have a one-on-one engagement with an AWS Partner Solutions Architect, or PSA. PSAs have cumulatively years of experience supporting millions of active customers using AWS, and they're able to provide guidance on how you can improve your architecture on AWS. The FTR also helps you qualify for APN programs. An approved FTR is actually a prerequisite for you to become eligible for APN programs like AWS ISV Partner Path, AWS Competency, AWS Service Ready, and AWS ISV Accelerate. What does an approved FTR mean? An approved FTR is achieved when your solution has all of the FTR requirements in place. If your solution is missing one or more requirements, you definitely can remediate those issues in order to achieve FTR approval. We did introduce a new badge this year to help promote FTR approved solutions to AWS customers. It's the reviewed by AWS badge. If your solution is FTR approved and you have paid the APN fee, which I believe is $2,500 US, your solution earns this badge. So there are three main workload types, and FTR requirements and processes differ according to your solution type. I've mentioned earlier that the FTR Lens really only applies to solutions that you host and manage in your accounts. These are solutions that your customers consume as a service. Customer deployed solutions are those that customers have to deploy and operate in their own AWS accounts. And then there are solutions that don't fall under these two categories. And for these other types, you just have to work with your partner development manager or your dedicated PSA to identify the proper next steps. For hosted and managed solutions, the review procedure is technical members of your staff meet with an AWS PSA to walk through the FTR checklist. So the PSA asks questions about what you are doing around certain topics. My next slide actually shows those topics at a high level. Customer deployed solutions are reviewed differently. For these solutions, you have to have a customer deployment guide that is assessed against a different FTR checklist. We want your customer deployment guides to provide prescriptive guidance on how exactly a customer should be deploying and operating the solution in their own AWS account using AWS best practices. Both checklists are linked here. Feel free to check them out. For hosted and managed solutions, here's a top level view of what we ask about. So we ask you to properly protect your root, properly protect your CloudTrail logs, secure sensitive information if you're storing and transmitting them within your systems, protect your resources by implementing proper access configurations and a sound backup and disaster recovery, and so on. There are very specific controls we look for you to have under each topic here. And the first point here is really why we are doing this demo today. And again, if you're not offering an as-a-service solution, this requirement does not apply. In order to gain FTR approval, you have to have completed an AWS Well-Architected review with the FTR Lens. And the actual requirement language for that is this: conduct a well-architected review with the FTR Lens on the production workload at least once a year. The reason for this is we want you to gain the benefit of learning how to better architect your workloads so that they are more secure, resilient, and cost optimized. When you go through an FTR, the PSA will ask, when was the last time you did a well-architected review with an FTR Lens? We are looking for you to have completed one within the past 12 months. An important thing to note here is you don't have to wait until you have completed one to request an FTR. It shouldn't be a blocker. You can request an FTR and complete the FTR with a PSA regardless of whether or not you've checked off this requirement. If you didn't complete it prior to the call, it will be marked as a finding, and you'll have to complete it in order to achieve FTR approval. That said, I still very highly recommend that you do one prior to the FTR call if you have not done so. Actually, I do recommend that you do one today or at your earliest convenience, just because this exercise is very useful for you to self-assess what your gaps are leading to the review so that you can start thinking about how to fix the items that you are missing. If you're familiar with a well-architected tool, you know that it provides you with a list of issues marked high or medium risk issues, depending really on what the issue is. The FTR Lens does the same thing, and later I'm going to show you what this looks like, but you're going to get essentially two lists of issues, one from the broader well-architected review and one from the FTR Lens. Here's one thing we get asked about frequently. Do you need to remediate all issues across both the Lens and the well-architected in order to successfully clear the FTR? The answer here is the higher risk issues from the FTR lens is what is mapped to the actual FTR requirements. So while we certainly want to see you remediate all issues from both the broader well-architected review and the FTR lens, you really want to prioritize the high-risk issues from only the FTR lens in order to successfully complete your FTR. And I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to walk you through the FTR lens now. Give me just a moment while I pull up my browser here. Okay, so I am showing you my AWS Management Console, and I am just going to go to my Well-Architected Tool. And how you start reviewing your workload is you define it, and then you fill out all of the required fields in here. I'm going to choose a region. North Virginia should be fine. And then I believe that's all the required fields in here. And I'm going to click on next. And here you see that you can apply lenses. And we are talking about the FTR lens today. So that is what we are going to choose here. And then I am going to click on define workload. So here, when you start reviewing it, you're going to see a drop down that asks you to choose between the Well-Architected Framework and the FTR lens. And again, in order to successfully clear the FTR, you have to complete both of them. And earlier, I was telling you that the Well-Architected review is comprised of a more expansive set of best practices. And actually, you can see here that it has 5 pillars or questions under questions under each pillar here. And really, in order for you to complete this review, you have to answer all of the questions. If I go back to this dashboard right here, and I choose the FTR lens, you're going to see that essentially the FTR lens only consists of really just a subset of AWS best practices. So it's not as expansive. And so that's the difference there. Again, this is something you have to go through each question under each pillar. You have to select the answer that is applicable to you. Once you finish that, and I'm going to cheat a little bit, I'm going to actually drill into the workload where I actually finish reviewing this. It's going to show you the total number of high risk and medium risk issues that were detected from both the broader well-architected framework and the FTR lens. So this is showing I have a total of 20 high risk issues and 1 medium risk issue. Now I was telling you earlier that what is actually required to for you to remediate in order to successfully clear the FTR is you have to prioritize the high risk issues only from the FTR lens. So if you scroll down the lenses part, the 20 here is actually broken down to like how many of that is actually from the broader well-architected framework and how many of that is coming from the FTR lens. And I see a total of 4 here. So that is what you need to be prioritizing in order to successfully complete your FTR. So I'm going to drill down here. And here you have a chance to see what exactly were identified as high-risk issues. And here you can see that I have all those 4, and I have the recommended improvement items for each of those items. If I click on this, I see an improvement plan that really walks me through exactly what needs to be implemented in order to fix those issues. And again, you have to remediate all of your higher risk issues in the FTR lens in order to pass the FTR. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. The FTR requires that you complete both the well-architected framework review and the FTR lens. But in order to successfully clear the FTR, you have to prioritize remediating, and you have to actually complete remediating the high-risk issues under the FTR lens. I know that that's confusing for many. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat if you need me to clarify anything further. The next topic that I want to cover is how exactly do you request an FTR, and the best way for me to talk about that is really to show you the resource you can go to for step-by-step instructions. It's in the public-facing FTR page, which I'm showing now. And there is a section here called How to Conduct an AWS Foundational Technical Review. Step 4 talks about how your alliance lead has to log in to APN Central to list the solution that you want reviewed. And then at the bottom of each solution listing, there is a section there that asks, are you ready to request an FTR? You choose yes on that, and then you submit that. And what happens is a team of PSAs here at AWS gets a request for that. We get your review assigned to a PSA here, and the PSA will contact you for next steps. And that's really all. That's really what I wanted to show you this morning. Lauren, do we have any questions?
Yeah. First question is the reviewing non-passed requirements automatic or requires a person?
I'm not sure I understand what that means.
Yeah. Can you clarify on the phone or in the chat? The other question I answered in the chat window, but it's worth answering for everyone on this call. Can the well-architected consulting partners that are eligible to perform well-architected reviews perform the well-architected review with the FTR lens?
We actually, this is a path that we are exploring, but I definitely think that we should do that. There's really no reason for a well-architected partner to skip through the lens if they're expecting that the customer will have to go through the lens at some point, or will have to go through the FTR at some point. So I would love to further explore this idea just to make sure that, you know, well-architected partners are aware of the actual technical bar for FTR requirements. But internally, this is something that we've discussed, and there is a lot of value to that.
Awesome. Yeah, and in the interim, definitely we can have those partners apply those lenses and prioritize the risks there to help set up the ISVs going through the foundational technical review for success. So if you're working with an ISV in the APN, feel free to leverage that lens to help them be prepared. If you don't pass a requirement, will it automatically rerun once you resubmit, or do you wait for someone at AWS to review the new submission?
So,
do you want me to answer that one, Claudine?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so when you do a well-architected review with the FTR lens or any lens within the well-architected review, you're going through on your own and selecting all the things that your team is doing, and that will generate a report, and within that report you'll see those high-risk issues and improvement plans. Once you've remediated some of those things, you can actually go back into that well-architected review that you've already submitted and update what best practices or requirements you're now following, and so that would be saved as something called a milestone. So for the FTR requirement of doing the well-architected review with the FTR lens, you just need to kind of complete that review. And then that's your way to prepare for the FTR with someone at AWS, but you don't need to resubmit anything, rerun it, or wait for an AWS person. When you feel like you're prepared for the FTR, you can request the FTR with the steps that Claudine just went through. How many FTRs are needed to be completed to upgrade partnership?
Yeah, so an FTR is tied to a specific solution. So now if you want APN engagement based on like 3 solutions, you are going to need to complete an FTR for each of those solutions. Now, does that mean that you have to go through separate FTRs? Probably not. The guidance is if you're offering multiple solutions and they are running, for instance, on the same platform and they are operated and managed pretty much the same way, you are going to need to complete one review, and that should apply to all 3 solutions that you listed in Partner Central. But I want to reiterate that the FTR is tied to a particular solution. So if you want engagement, if you want go-to-market engagement for one solution, then you need to complete an FTR on that. If you want the reviewed by AWS badge tied to one particular solution, then you have to complete an FTR on that solution.
Awesome. And the last question is if we, a consulting partner, can run an FTR for our clients when the client is using their own AWS account. And for those well-architected consulting partners that we have, I would say you would use the FTR Lens the same way you would apply the well-architected review in the tool. And this would just provide more of that prescriptive guidance Claudine was mentioning that is specific to the foundational technical review itself. So again, if you're working with, if your client has their own account and they're an ISV and the APN preparing for the FTR, you can use that lens to identify those risks and make sure to prioritize those remediations in order to pass the FTR. We've got a question on what does remediation for an FTR look like?
So remediation for an FTR looks like you fixing all of the issues that were identified. So formally, when you do an FTR, the partner SA working with you will actually deliver a final report at the end of the engagement. This report will list all of the findings from the review. So if I were to map that to an FTR lens, the FTR lens high risk issues will be pretty much, it would consist of the same things that you are going to find in that final report. Probably different wording, but they should pretty much be the same. So if you self-assess before an actual review call, and after your self-assessment you didn't change anything architecturally, then you are going to pretty much be familiar with what the final report is going to look like from the PSA. Remediating those items that are marked as findings constitute as remediation. So in order to complete remediation for an FTR and change your review outcome to approved, you have to fix all of the issues that were marked as findings.
Awesome. And then the last question that we have right now, so if there's other questions, feel free to add them in, is do we need to do an FTR for all AWS services we are using, like S3, EFS, etc.?
No, you have to do an FTR for all solutions that you offer. It really depends on how you want your APN journey to be like. If you want go-to-market engagement for all of your solution offerings, then you need an FTR for each of your solution offerings. But like I said, the FTR is tied to workload that you offer. And I forgot to mention, and this is very important, this workload needs to be in production. So you have to have customers actually using this solution in order for you to gain FTR approval. So it's not tied to a specific service that you're consuming, it's tied to a specific solution that you offer your customers.
Awesome. And then if you pass the FTR Lens, is the meeting with the AWS Partner Solution Architect a formality, as in, are you going to pass, or are there other things that are checked that the FTR Lens does not cover?
Yeah, so currently the engagement with a partner SA is a formal step in the process. We are working on ways to maybe eliminate that step in the future and make this more of a self-service automated mechanism. But currently, you cannot bypass the PSA engagement. The reason for that is because the PSA will want to gather further detail on what you actually put as answers in the FTR Lens. And, you know, they are still going to have to kind of assess the solution based on the questions that they have. It may not take, so typically what's expected is you meet with a PSA for 60 minutes, but if you complete the FTR Lens and you pass it, you know, the conversation may be expedited. It may not take the typical 60 minutes, but yes, the PSA step is still required.
Yeah, but everything that the PSA would cover is in the Lens, so no surprises for when you sit down with that PSA. Awesome.
Yeah, and obviously, like, you know, some topics covered in the FTR as a whole are, you know, a lot simpler than others. So if you complete the FTR Lens, you know, it's possible for you and the PSA to have more meaningful conversations around the more complex best practices, which will benefit both parties, because, you know, you're actually engaging on topics that you may need more help around.
Totally. Awesome. Thank you, Claudine. That was the last question that we had.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Lauren, for the help answering questions. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Great. Thank you, Lauren and Claudine. Thank you all for attending.